Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by learning to develop yourself, your skills, your network, and more. I'm Brian, your host. Today we have Zubin Pratap, ex-Google engineer, ex-lawyer, current software engineer, teacher, mentor, tech influencer. Welcome to the show, Zubin. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Brian. It's really awesome to be here. You have such a great show, I've listened to several podcast episodes now, and you what a great name, by the way. Develop Yourself.
I wish I could take credit for it, but yeah, I inherited the name. Yeah,
Doesn't matter.
good
You're,
thing, right?
you're holding that flag high, my friend, and it's such a great because it's got so many multiple meanings, all of which are really important. All of them. So they're great.
Appreciate that. It's funny because the way we met is a little background. Like, I've seen your ads on like Instagram, and I thought, who is this dude? Looks kind of like me. If you're watching this, if you're subscribed to the newsletter and you're lucky enough to see my editing skills for the image I'm going to put up, it's going to be an image of me and Zubin side by side. We look kind of like we could be long lost brothers. But anyway, I saw your ad in Instagram, and I thought, I clicked into it, and I thought, this guy knows what he's talking about. It was no BS. It was really good stuff. One of the reasons I reached out to you, we're also in a tech creators Slack group, and I just saw you're genuine. You seem to really want to help people. You have the technical foundation, and you have a really interesting story, which I want to get into as well.
Yeah, man, keen to get into it. I think there's so much. One of my commitments to people is there's a lot of, especially as we got into this influencer culture the last 7 years. It wasn't like this. I've been around 20 something years in the workforce, and it's so easy to put out BS out there and to capitalize on hope and kind of exploit it, that I've taken a commitment when I put stuff out. It's no BS. I could be wrong, but I mean it. I'm not BSing. Maybe I'm wrong. You never know if you're truly right as things change, but it's never going to be a place of BS. I truly believe what I'm saying.
I appreciate that. I also think that humans are really good at detecting disingenuousness, and we can smell it on people. I
100%.
think the more genuine you can be, the better for your business. Not only is it good for you selfishly, but I think it's just good morally as well.
Yeah, totally, totally. And it's all. I believe in long term games, right? Like I play the long game for everything, and I think reputation and credibility is a long game. It's not. You cannot play the short game with stuff like you. It's just not possible.
I hear that. And speaking of the long game, so you played a very long game with your career. You were a lawyer. Can you kind of walk us through? So you're a lawyer. You also were an ex Google software engineer. So you made it to like the pinnacle of most jobs, which is like, I'm a lawyer, top of the top. And you say, you know what? I want to be a software engineer. Now you went to Google. What was the process to get to Google? Like, how'd you study and be able to be a hireable software engineer at one of the best companies?
So in terms of the process, I think people assume there's some sort of formula. So there isn't really, because it's one thing to know how to code. So just the thing with the FANG companies is the interview process is not really about coding. Let me reframe this. Lots of very good coders never make it through the FANG interviews. Lots of really bad coders will do well on the DSNA stuff, right? Because building things and cracking DSA problems are two totally different things. And what I think a lot of people don't realize, and again, I realize this because I've been on the hiring side in three careers, 4 countries, and it's the same, is the interview is a different skill set altogether. Doing the job is a totally different skill set. Getting the interview is a totally different skill set. Negotiating the right offer and picking the right one, completely different skill set, right? And so for something like Google or indeed all FANG, I'm sitting in Australia and I think I had Snapchat, Facebook, Google, Amazon interviews and stuff, right? Sitting here, right? And how do I get interviews? I have no background in coding and stuff. Well, I did have other things in my background that helped. I had a strong track record. Now, most of the students who come to coaching don't actually have strong track records, even in their existing career. Mm-hmm. I did have a strong track record. So I could give credibility signals on the basis of that, right? So that's one. You have to have a strong record. 2, I'd been rejected from FANG companies at the interview stage maybe about 10 times by that time, over 10 years in multiple careers. Okay.
Okay.
And when I got the Google one or the Amazon one or the Facebook ones, it was always by earning a referral. Now, that was different 4 or 5 years ago. Like you had to earn the referrals. These days, I see people just giving out referrals to someone they don't know and
They want that money.
they want the money. And I think that's the problem with the
Mhm.
wrong incentives is I, I personally do not agree with that, right? Here's why. I would not refer someone into my company until I felt that they were the kind of people I'd want to work with, not just technically. Technical is one thing, but you can teach people the technical skills. You can't, unless you give someone a brain transplant, you can't give them a new personality. Right. So, you know,
Very true.
I have a very strong view on that. And so I don't refer people in unless I'm sure that they're the kind of people I'd want in my environment. You know, just the same way like you wouldn't invite anyone over to your house. I take the same guarded mentality. Now people could say, "Oh, you're being a gatekeeper." You could argue that, right? You could argue that I'm gatekeeping, but I'm also quality controlling. Now, you know, I don't know what the difference is. Beyond a
And protecting your reputation too. I mean, ultimately, you're saying, "Hey, I vouch for this person."
exactly.
You wanna protect your own reputation.
Exactly. I mean, I did put a LinkedIn survey, and a lot of, I think about 30% people that felt that a referral is not a recommendation. I don't agree with that perspective. I think a referral is an implicit recommendation that this person should join the company, as opposed to just being a lead for the company. If you're just being an alternative to LinkedIn lead, that I wouldn't call that a referral. I'd call that a lead. You know,
Yeah, right, yeah. I mean, imagine like a four-person company, you refer somebody, they get on there and they say, "Oh, didn't you refer this person?" And they're terrible. That's not gonna be a
pretty
fun
good.
feeling,
No,
you know?
especially if you want to go into leadership roles, um, that sort of stuff, your ability to bring in talent, to qualify them correctly, to make sure that they're right fit, to grow the team, to build output, that stuff will haunt you forever. Like a bad code, everyone's
Oh, yeah.
done, you know, and everyone will recover from bad code because you can fix that stuff. You can roll back. It's not easy to roll back a hire, man. You know, you can't git commit and git reset hit, you know, it's not the same thing, right?
It's hard getting rid of people. It's true. It's like I've seen that. I'm very lucky to have a great team of people, and like I've changed our hiring process around. But I've seen firsthand that it can be very difficult to remove people that you may not want. You know, I'm
Very
not in
hard.
that position now, luckily. But yeah, it's not as simple as like hey, you're not working out. See, it's like
Yeah.
could be a year long process
Totally. Uh,
to do that.
and
Yeah.
it's messy and it's, you know, legally fraught and all that. And so, you know, going back to the
Mhm.
process about the Google stuff also is, again, I realized that most employers had implicitly had this rule, but Google made it explicit in that they'd rather say no to a great candidate than accidentally hire a bad candidate. Right. So
Yep, I've heard that.
yeah, so they'd rather have a false negative than a false positive. Now, most people don't fully analyze why that is, but really it's this exactly what we just talked about. They'd rather say no to a good candidate because not there are plenty of good candidates in the market, right? And saying no to a good candidate doesn't bring you down or affect the business as much as saying yes to the wrong candidate because it's hard to get rid of them. You have to get them a shot. There's training costs involved, there's legal risks involved, and there's cultural damage while you figure out how to exit them as well. You know, so it is but people don't understand how costly recruitment is. So when I understood, okay, they'd rather rule me out incorrectly than rule me in incorrectly.
Mhm.
I'm like, so clearly it can't be about the technical skills then. They're obviously looking for more. Obviously, logically, because if they're happy to say no to a great candidate, why would they do that? Right?
It's clever.
Why would they do that? So, and again,
Yeah.
it helped me a lot that I was on the hiring side. So I was able to reverse engineer this from first principles. I'm like, well, what have I done when I've hired? Yeah, even if there was a great candidate, if this, you know, and obviously I didn't come from an engineering background, but you know, there was a lot more subjectivity allowed in previous careers, especially in service professions like law, where you know it's very
Mhm.
client facing. You know, if you can't handle that right, and that's very subjective, then you know you can't test for client facing skills. You can test for passing an algorithm or passing tests, right? You can do that, but
Yeah.
just for client facing. So I believe that subjectivity is important. So I'm like, okay, there's more that I got to do. So first, I got to get a referral. Then I've got to do. It's table stakes to do well enough of the DSA stuff that they know you know what you're talking about. You may not complete it in time.
Mhm.
You may even go down the wrong path, but you're reasoning correctly. You're thinking about the problem correctly. You're communicating and collaborating. You're showing your curiosity, your willingness to learn. You're showing that you're not married to idea as a path dependent and stuff. So that's another thing. Let's assume you clear that. Then you've got to do the culture fit, the hire fit, the behavioral stuff, right?
Mhm.
And that is entirely dependent on your communication skills, but even more than that, understanding why they may rule you out. right? Because remember, even if you pass the technical stage, they could still rule you. And that's often a very team specific thing and an individual specific thing. So you got to learn how to read.
Yeah,
You got to learn to understand what's important to this hiring manager, what's important to the team. And this comes down to asking good questions, doing your due diligence on them. And then I would often just tell people, can you tell me what's important for you? And I will tell you whether or not I'm actually able to deliver on that. And if that's
it's a good
important to
one
you, fine. This is how I would do it because this is important to you. So if I'd get a question, you know, um, if you read the values about a company, you'll know, like, the company I'm working right now, Chainlink, for example, one of the values is in this constructive dialogue thing, where it's okay to disagree with people, but how you do it matters. And
for sure.
that's a really important point, and it's so fundamental to everyday experience, right? Understanding these values means you can call them out and then say, in this context, given that this is important to you, this is how I'd approach it for you. It's not the same way I'd approach it for somebody else who doesn't value this or has a different value around this. You know, you have to tailor it to that person, but that involves asking questions. And a lot of candidates, they're so nervous during the interview that they don't ask questions.
I fell in that trap. I went to Google, got on site, and I did very well in the technical round, and I was really shocked when I didn't get the offer because I thought, "Oh, I nailed it all."
Yeah.
But I was so nervous and I was way too over focused on that, and I didn't get it overall. Still a really cool experience,
Yeah.
and it really, like, enforced me to learn DSA, which I had not previously. But man, that is an amazing story. I wish I had heard this advice when I was going for it. I think I would have had a bit of a different approach
Yeah.
to it. Instead of being like a coding robot, I would have been a little more showed up a little bit more like myself and maybe done more research in general on the people that interviewing me and other things. This was an on-site, in-person one. You know the people's names ahead of time as well.
Yeah. Well, and there's only so much you can also do about this on the day. And I mean, fortunately, Brian, you've done really well. And this is, I think, something I really want people to understand is it says nothing about you if you don't make it to one of these companies. And equally, it says very little about you, I believe, if you do. Because if they're happy to say no to good people, all you can say is you're one of the good people if you got in. You cannot say you're not one of the good people if you didn't get it. Like, it's just logic, right?
I like that you said that. I think too many people wrap up, like, their dream or their personality and, like, only getting to one of these, like, top 5. I'm like, there's hundreds of thousands of companies. I mean, I don't making that number up, but there's a lot of companies out there that write code and a lot of excellent software engineers out there that have never been at any of the letters in FANG or MANG or whatever the acronym is now.
100%. I'm in each of these companies. Like, I was at Google, I've seen it directly there. But even I have lots of friends in Amazon and Microsoft and LinkedIn and all these places. Not everyone's happy. Not everyone's doing great work. Not everyone's fulfilled. Not everyone's having growth. We can't assume that the brand is the experience. Like, the consumer's perspective of the brand is not the employee's experience of it internally. Like, this two totally different things. And we need to realize that we have to be clear what our goals are. I would argue my first dev job, there were 4 people. I was the fifth. And it was a startup being bootstrapped from the ground up. I would say I learned more there in that 1 year across the board in terms of all the skills than I did at Google in my first year. Even though at Google, I learned a lot more technical stuff, but I learned a lot
Mhm.
more overall from being that close to the road, that I was in the
That makes
in the
perfect
first
sense.
4 or 5. And so it depends on what you value, right? If you want to be more rounded, you don't want to be in a team where you're just going to be doing, you know, and let's be honest, these giant companies, they have giant processes and they have giant code bases. Your velocity is a bit lower. Your change sets are smaller. There's a lot of ramping up involved. And that's great. You learn a lot. There's no question that you'll be an outstanding engineer if you spend time there. No question about it. But you can also
Mhm.
do that elsewhere. That's the point. Like, it's not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I totally agree from what I've heard. I can't speak from experience, but I've heard this story a lot, and now
Yeah.
I'm curious, which leads me to, what made you leave Google?
So a couple of things. So on the personal front, my marriage is starting to end. So I was hired for the Mountain View office. We packed up, we sold the house, we booked the freight, we put things, in container, and then the US shut down. By this time, Australia had already shut down, right? We had already been in hard lockdown for about 5 months. And under the Trump government, the US was a little bit slower to lock down than a lot of the other countries were. So Google said, oh, we'll do it next quarter. We'll do it next quarter. So I ended up working largely remotely, and I learned a lot about remote work and engineering. I'm not necessarily a fan of it. I don't think it's the panacea people think it is. Like, it's very fraught, right? Anyway, I did that, but I was in the Melbourne office because some of us are allowed to go into the Melbourne office every now and then. And I made some great. And then when they opened up and they said, "Well, why don't you come over to Mountain View?" I said, I'd be happy to, but there's some personal stuff going on with my then ex-wife. We're still very good friends. Um, and that also changed a bit during COVID because we went through an 18-month lockdown, which was brutal here in Melbourne. Like it was intense. And I'm the only child. For personal reasons, I'm like, my parents live in Europe. I want to try and work remotely now that I understand how to do it. I don't think, yeah, it's not the kind of thing I would recommend for people who don't have some solid experience behind them, um,
Right.
because it requires a different workplace dynamic. But so those two reasons, and also as much as I was learning at Google, I realized I could stay on in the Google Australian offices, but the kind of work they were doing wasn't quite aligned with my longer term goals. Like it was a very different kind of engineering. And man, I was 41 at this point in time, and I didn't want to. I'd made one rule to myself, right? When I said, "What would I do if I was 20?" I'd said, but with the benefit of being in my late 30s and 40s. What would I do if I was 20, but with the wisdom of somebody who'd been around 20 years? And I realized the one of the big reasons for staying at Google was the pay, the comfort, the people, and the fear of giving up the prestige. Right.
Mm,
And I'm like, those are reasons that are no longer valid for me. The people is a valid reasons. That made it really hard. But I'm like, where do I want my career to grow? Do I want adventure or do I want status? That was the big choice for me. And I realized I want the
yeah.
adventure. I want the adventure. And then the blockchain place is starting to, I was a bit on the fence about the whole blockchain thing. Some respects I still am, but I'm like, where can I find the best people?
Yeah.
Where could I learn from them in a fairly risky environment? Because that's where the adventure is. That's where the growth of the opportunity lies, the green space. Because Google's a very large company. People think it's not a startup. It's a very large company and it feels like it on the inside sometimes, but the people are amazing. So it was a difficult trade-off, but it was partly personal and partly my need for adventure.
I like that a lot. I think that's really cool that you did that because a lot of people say, "Okay, I'm done now. I made it. I kind of made it," and you've decided that seems like a little bit of a thread throughout maybe your life. Then, okay, I did lawyer. Now I just started into entrepreneurship. Now I'm a software engineer. Now into that, and now also, what led you to start teaching and coaching others too?
Oh, I've been doing that for a while now, but probably more formalized now because I didn't really realize that online coaching was going to be such a thing. But I'd been mentoring and coaching people for years now, right? Even when I made my first career change. Um, and this is the thing, people, man, when I went from law to the business side, I got rejected. I was on, Alan Stein's podcast recently about that, and I think I got rejected over 50 times internally from the company I was in, even though I was in the top 5 performers.
Wow.
Okay, internally in the company that I already had 5 years of reputation in, and I was in the top 5%, right? And that made me think. I'm like, people think it's about learning code. Career change is a completely different from learning to right. Learning to code is the obvious part. It's the bit that everyone thinks they need to do, but it's table stake.
Mhm.
To be honest, take it to the dance. Most people who learn to code will never successfully change their career statistically. Like the vast majority will never do because it's a completely different ballgame. The new industry you want to move to is going to have an allergic reaction to you as an outsider. That's
Mm,
that's just how it is. It's like it's going to release antibodies, right? And I realized that the first time I did this was everyone said you're a smart guy. We've seen how you handle deals and operations. You work really well with people. There's no reason why you can't change into a business role. Great. Will you give me a job? No. What? Why not? Well,
yeah.
there are other candidates that are less risky, and there's HR, and I have to defend this to my boss. And basically, it was too hard, and I was too much of an They had all the faith in me as a person, but they weren't willing to bet on it. Like,
I've seen that. I think we've all seen that. Yeah,
what?
that's interesting. I never would have thought. All my whole career has basically just been software, so I can only relate it to that. It's funny because you're kind of opening my eyes up. The same issues exist everywhere
And
else.
this is what I keep saying on LinkedIn. Like, and I
Yeah.
respond to other people's posts. I'm like, guys, this is not unique to tech. I'm not saying that, tech doesn't have, I'm saying it's not unique to tech. These are meta principles that I've seen over 20 years, 4 countries, 3 careers. And there are slight differences in each industry, each industry. There are important differences, but the principle is the same. A hiring manager has a job to get done, has lots of other alternatives, and you're a risky one. At this point in time, you're not even going to get invited to the interview because, quite simply, why should they? Why should they invite you to the interview?
Your people, I think that people want to take a chance on them, and, like, I'll be hon I do like to take chances with people. I mean, I'm also an outlier, and I still can't. I still like,
Right?
Listen, I this is not a charity case as much as I would love to.
Thank you.
I can't because I don't wanna look bad either. I'm really curious though, like, what do you when you coach people, how besides learning to code is a technical skill, a foundational skill, you're right, like, there's so much more to it. What are the things you work on with people, and, like, how do you see people succeed typically?
So I have a view on this, right? So I occupy the niche where, okay, again, I'm very goals focused, right? Because you can't make a plan until you're clear. Like if you want to go from San Francisco to New York and you head south, you're never going to get there. Okay. It doesn't matter how hard you work, it doesn't matter how smart you are. So direction is more important than speed. In which case, start with the right goal. So I tend to focus mainly on people who are in full time jobs, typically in their 30s, have family and obligations that make it hard for them to quit and go into a boot, right? Now, I did do a boot camp for a week in the US. I left my family behind. When then I came back when I realized that that particular boot camp, and I can't speak for them all because, it's very different. I think yours is quite different because you yourself have got such a great life story. You have done the change. You weren't a dyed in the wool, started out to be a science. You made the switch, right? So I think your boot
Yeah.
makes a lot more sense. I didn't know about yours, and I guess you weren't in it back then. This was 2018. But I came back because I realized from there I was going to learn to code with people with a significantly less risk profile than me. I was 36, 37, or whatever it is, and they were
Mhm.
5. Um, and my focus was career change, not learning to code, right? And I was like, you're
Ah.
not going to be able to do that for me because, a lot of them haven't been on the hiring side. Plus, I wasn't I mean, I'd done the startup, and so I hadn't worked for a while. So I was happy to
Mhm.
pull down from the mortgage and spend, 20 something thousand US, not including accommodation because I was going to be in San Francisco for 3.5 months. It's going to be very expensive. And I'm like, okay,
Yes, sir.
I was in a position of privilege where I could pull down from the mortgage, blink my eyes, and hope that it was all going to work out. Like just clench my eyes shut and hope for the best because I'd already done the risk for the startup, right? And I'd already lost money. But most people aren't in that position. It's terrifying for people to have to leave their jobs, pay the
Mhm.
bootcamp fees, leave their jobs, lose income. So now you've got lost income plus bootcamp fees, and then you don't know when you're going to get back into the job market again. So there's all those costs mounting up. And I realized it's a small segment of people, and they're typically in their 30s. And so what happens to them, right? So I said, okay, I'm going to try and help those people, right? And that means I have to work a lot on mindset. I have to work on personally, coaching them. And, I've had students in over 8 countries, and pretty much 100% of the people who follow the plan get success. And that's because each person's plan is different. Like if I say, hey, Brian, how
Mhm.
do you get to London? Your answer is going to be totally different from mine. Why? Because if we have different starting points, we're choosing different modes of transport. Everyone thinks, oh, I'm going to, I want to learn to code. Oh, I want to become a coder, which is going to London. Yeah, but where are you starting from? How much do you know? How much you need to know. What do you not know that's going to be important, especially if we know that people would rather rule out a good candidate than rule in a wrong candidate? What else do you need? And that's very individual and it's extremely time consuming. So I work with 7, 8 people at a time at most for 12 months.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That sounds about right, to be honest. I think that's the reality even before the current market. I don't know, it's hard to determine now in this market 'cause I get my views skewed by social media. I'm on it,
Yeah.
as much as everybody else. And I am curious, like, what have you seen change, if anything, between like, back when you were getting hired and now? Like what are the things that are helping people to get hired or de-risk themselves?
So a couple of things. Structurally, it's a different market cycle, right? So when I was getting hired, it was towards the tail end of a bull run, 2018, 2019, and just before COVID. Um, So there was a lot of tailwind, which helped, but also the run didn't last very long. People who are starting now, like I tell my students who are joining these days, I'm like, look, it's going to look bleak for a while. It's going to take longer than you expect, but you're going to be at the start of the next bull run, which means you've got another 10 to 15 years of going up again. Okay. So play the long game. That's one. But I reckon it's actually harder today than ever before for all the wrong reasons. There's too much information and too
Mm,
much BS. And I think Man, when you've been around a while, 10 years ago, when you were applying for jobs, did we use LinkedIn the way we do it now?
Oh, I wasn't even on LinkedIn.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's people don't realize how fast things have changed. I speak to recruiters all the time. They've got too many people applying. So when you think about things like why do they use ATS and filters, it's not because they don't want to find the best person, it's because their workload's too high. Why is their workload
Oh, yeah.
right? But why is their workload too high? It's because when information becomes free, the signal to noise ratio drops dramatically. In other words, there's a lot more crap in the system than good water. That's what happens when information is free. There's too much bullshit,
Absolutely.
right? So now they need bullshit filters. Students need bullshit filters. Teachers and coaches need. Why? Because information's free. When anything is free, it has no value by definition.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah.
So I'm not a fan of free information because I think it leveled the playing field. But what it also did is it made it impossible to choose. And I read a book in
Oh, yeah.
2003, which was very influential, Barry Schwartz, the paradox of choice. We're
Mhm.
cognitively not good at choosing when we have too much choice. And what does too much information do? It overwhelms you with too much choice, right?
I've seen people do this thing, this learn which you've probably seen, these learning loops. I call it like the hamster wheel style learning.
Yeah.
I'll talk to somebody and they're learning and they go and they're like, DevOps, Python, JavaScript, C sharp. I heard that you
Cybersecurity.
should do AI now. And then they're just aggregating this insane amount of skills. And I talked to them like a year later, 2 years later, they're still on the hamster wheel. And I'm thinking like, this is like, it's cool. I love it. Like maybe at our stage too, there's a lot of information out there and we can pick and choose now and kind of identify mega trends, micro trends. And it's still really
Oh,
difficult to
God.
filter out stuff. But if you're new, it's like I couldn't really imagine like how you just decide like this is the path I'm gonna go down because everybody's telling you something different.
It's impossible and it's unrealistic because when you don't know what you don't know, you can't intelligently choose.
Mhm.
And so you're forced into start, stop, start, stop, start, stop, dabble, 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 dabble. And then how do you possibly have confidence in your judgment when you have no basis for that judgment? Like it's guesswork, right?
Yeah.
And so
Or the first person you meet. It could be just the first person that happened to pop in your feed that you saw, and then that person may lead you astray because a lot of times the people that are telling people software information aren't actually software engineers, which is even more mind blowing to me.
it's terrifying. It's honest. And I keep
Yeah.
telling people, I'm like, look, if you're going to do something, find someone who's available, which is hard enough, but who's done
Mhm.
pretty much exactly what you want to do. Because there are lots of people who've done things similar. But look, just because I've been to a restaurant in New York, if I've never been to one in Toronto, doesn't mean I'm qualified to give you a restaurant recommendation in Toronto. Just because I've been to the finest restaurants in New York doesn't qualify me. I've never been to Toronto.
I mean, I tell my kids this. I told my son this. He wants to get into fashion. I said, "Look, I don't know anything about that." I said, "What you need to do, find somebody that's done it.
Yes.
Ask them, how did you do it?"
Yes.
And then say, "Can I pay you?
Hey,
Or can I apprentice with you know, if they want money, say, "Hey, how much does it cost for me to learn from you?"
yeah.
And just get that information.
And this is so I'm so glad you're teaching your kids to be willing to invest because that's the other thing the free information thing has done, has made people believe that just because I can get the information for free, I can get the outcome for free. No, that no. In fact, exactly the opposite. If you want to know what information to ignore, that's now got value, right? In a world of free information that has no value, what has value is knowing what to ignore, right? And that's any
Yeah.
boot camp, any college. They may be teaching you all the same stuff. It's the same textbooks, same whatever. You go to
Mhm.
MDN and read the documentation for the basics of JavaScript. It's the same
For
here,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
What are they actually helping you with? They're helping you put your focus in one place and structuring your time so that you don't
Yeah.
do crap. That's where the value
Yeah.
lies now. That's where the value lies. And so I'm glad you're teaching your kids to invest in stuff like that because to be honest, this entire man, never before in the history of humankind has anyone said, I can acquire something for free and sell it to somebody else for $100,000 every year.
Yeah, right.
Which mark
I want a six-figure career, and I wanna pay a single dime
correct,
to learn anything of it.
correct. I will not pay once to get six figures every year for the rest of my life. And
Yeah.
these are people who claim to know economics. How? How? How is this even possible?
Oh, man.
It's just
I
basic
feel you.
logic. It's basic logic, but people, they're being sold a lot of bullshit. Y- One thing I loved about, your podcast and your material on your website, I did take a look at parasites. You're very clear.
Mhm.
This is the first step. Then there are other steps. You've got to do this
There are
step,
steps.
right? There are step by step. And so this will take you to the next step. Most people don't say that. They're not honest enough to say that. They'll be like, this will take you to where you want to go. No, it won't. It absolutely will not. This is the first step. This is how you get started. Then you got to do all this other stuff. So that's kind of what I do with my students, and they don't need to quit their jobs, and they don't need to take all that risk. Yes, of course, there's an investment. You know, I'll tell you what. I've had a couple of people come to me and say, "Well, you have no right to not help people and charge. Or if you want to help people, you're not really helping. You're charging." And I'm like,
Oh, wow.
yeah, I know. Great logic. So I said, so you want me to coach you for free? And they're like, yes. I said, done. Agreed. You've got to give your first year as a software engineer for free. Oh, no, no, no,
Yeah, right. There you go.
I can't do that. Why not? Do you not want to help people for free? Like I said, I will
Yeah,
find
right.
you a job at an NGO, not for profit, right? Where you're doing good work with your engineering skill, but you've got to do it for free. Not a single person is taking me up on that.
Yeah. I'd love to see somebody do that, but that's a wild statement. It does blow my mind sometimes, and I'm like, and it's like, you're free to also, you don't have to. Like, that's the nice thing. Like, I want to pay people. Like, when I became an engineering manager, the first one was like, who can I, like, pay
Right.
to tell me what I'm doing because I need to know? And also, I'll be honest, if something's free, there's less incentive for me or most people to actually finish it. It's the reason I paid for, like, personal trainer or engineering manager coach, like a person to mentor me or whatever,
Everything in
I mean,
life has
you're right.
value.
It has value.
If you don't put all the books I was gifted, most of the books that I was gifted or which I got for free and stuff, I didn't finish reading compared to the ones that I paid for. It's the best known life hack in the world. Put skin in the game, it'll sharpen your focus and you'll get shit done. You know,
Yeah.
nobody exactly like you said. Pay for the fitness person, and suddenly your diet improves. You know,
Yeah.
that's just
7 years with, like, on my own, I was like, "I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I'm just kinda figuring this stuff out." And in 3 months, this dude got me, like, the best shape of my whole life, and I was like, "Damn, that was crazy. I can't believe that, like, that actually worked." And, like, I needed direction and somebody just, like, just reduce the cognitive overload for me.
totally,
Like, just tell me what to do.
totally. And the shortcut is getting the insight, not the information. Right? Exactly said. By the way, I had a non-technical coach. Because for me, the technical stuff, I was like, okay, I think I can make this plan on my own. That 4 years of trial and error behind. I knew what I went through my diary and I said, okay, all these things didn't work. So if I did the opposite logically, I didn't even know about inverse thinking from Charlie Munger. Then I only found out about later. But I did the same thing. This didn't work, so do the opposite, right? And I had a non-technical coach, and all she did with me was make me work on my cognitive process, how I think about things, because thoughts drive behavior. Now, this cognitive restructuring is a huge part of what I do with my students because it helps them for the rest of their career, right? And to your point about the results you get when you invest a little bit, I keep telling people, I'm like, look, no matter what you do, you're paying in three resources. You're going to pay time, you're going to pay money, you're going to pay energy. But they dials on a stereo system, okay? And I'm showing my age by talking about stereo systems here, but they dials on a music system because you increase one, it affects the others. If you want to take a bus from New York to San Francisco, you'll save money, you'll lose time. You want to take a plane, you'll lose money or you'll spend more money, but you'll save a lot of. You decide what resource is valuable for you. And for every month that you're not a software developer, and let's say you start off at 80 grand or 90 grand, every month you're losing 6. Every month that you're late to that party, you're losing 6K. Okay. So if if somebody gets you there even 3 months faster or 4 months
Mhm.
faster, the question is that an investment or not? And by the way, how much did you? I'd always ask people is how much have you spent on your car? Can you
On your what?
on your car, right?
Oh, on your
Yeah.
car, yeah.
And can you sell that next year for more money? No. So that's the difference between an expense and an investment.
I like the way you reframe this. This is a really, I think, powerful way to rethink. It took me a long time to do that. I had like this whole hustler, penny pinching mentality. And as soon as I let go of that, I mean, I've just seen not only, I think not everything's about money, but it's a little bit about money too. I mean, I enjoy making I've been broke and I've been not broke, and I much prefer being not broke.
Yeah.
And I've just seen how quickly I was able to ramp up through, like, acquiring knowledge and getting the right people around me and seeing that, like, this is an investment that actually has, like, a monetary payoff, a gain, and also confidence and other things that are, like, less tangible.
Yeah.
But I just saw quickly how much that accelerated my career the moment I, like, started saying, "I feel okay investing in myself and paying for things," even after I got hired. That's when I actually started investing the most in myself.
Yeah. And that's exactly so. I mean, for me to change my money mindset about investment versus expense, that cost me $25,000 to break through, ironically. Right? Like, and that just
Yeah,
look at how much it unlocks in life. But question for you, Brian, given your specific incredible journey and really remarkable,
appreciate that.
I mean, I appreciate the fact that you have done that because people have no excuse when they have people like you that they can always aspire to do something, that they didn't think was possible. But that's where this question about the mindset thing is for you to make that switch without evidence is a leap of faith. Do you see the first step? Now we know that the right investment of money is always a game changer, right? And
Mhm.
that one thing. And the other thing we know is that it's never as bad as you think before you spend it. And then once you invest it, even if it's a biggish number, you don't actually stress about it that much. It's okay.
It's kinda crazy,
Kind
yeah.
of crazy. You don't really think about it after it's done. You think about it before it's done. That's always the way. It's so weird.
Totally. Yeah.
I've had people come to me and say, I actually don't remember how much your program costs. I'm like, do you remember how much you fretted about it before you joined? No. I'm like, you were fretting about it. That kind of
That's so funny. I just went through this right now. I'm, like, paying somebody to help out with, like, ads and marketing, and, like, before I was like, oh." Then I paid him, like, "Yeah, now I'm ready to pay him more." I'm like, "Oh, great. See, some I wanna give you more money."
there you go. How, and so this is the question for you is the first one's a leap of faith
Mhm.
without any quote unquote evidence. How did you make that leap of faith? Because I think that's what people need to learn from you is when you don't have the evidence and you have to bet on yourself and you could lose because there's always a chance of loss and a strong chance of loss. How do you still bet on yourself?
So that's an interesting question, and I've completely leaned into my optimism. I've always been a fairly optimistic person, and some people would even say naive.
Mhm.
And I've really leaned into that. And I think people think, "Oh, yeah, it's gonna hurt you." It has not. It has in some ways for sure, but overall it's been incredibly helpful. I'm naive enough to think that I can actually do something, even if life may have told me no. Now I can look back and I have enough instances where I've won the game that I feel like, okay, I have enough evidence now to believe in myself.
Uh-huh.
But before that, you're right, I had none. So I was at this stage where I was like, well, this is about as bad as it can get, right? Like I was in a really bad situation, an intervention. If you want to hear more about it, you can go back to another episode and hear about my sordid life history. But anyway, I was like, okay, well, this is about as far down as I can go. So what's the worst? I mean, I had not much to lose at this point, and I thought, let me spin the wheel. And I thought, and my mom would tell me things like, say, well, here's the thing: you spin the wheel, and maybe you lose the money, and you don't get what you want. So what? You're still in the same position.
Uh-huh.
Maybe you spin the wheel and you get lucky and you go ahead. And I thought I was going to do it anyway, but I liked the way she phrased that and kind of helped me think through that. And so now, but since then, I've built up enough cases where I'm like, I can look back. I know being optimistic is much more practical
Yeah.
than being pessimistic. And when I look at people that are pessimistic versus those that are optimistic, I'm always going to choose to be in the optimistic group.
And tell me something as a hiring manager. Let's extend that logic, right? As a hiring manager, because I have my answer for this, probably coincide with yours, but I'm curious to know yours. If you were faced with prospects with career changes, would you choose the ones that had the guts to risk it and invest in themselves? Or would you choose the person who was trying to sort of get by on deals and bargains and things? Who would you say had the more commitment?
Oh, absolutely. The person that put it all on the line,
Right.
you know?
Right. And who would you
It,
trust?
it tells you about their mindset.
Exactly. This is the point I keep trying to tell people is one of the signals you can give to your hiring manager if you're trying to change career and become a coder is to show that you wanted it more than everybody else they've spoken to. And words are so easy, man. Like in Game of Thrones, words are win. I've never had someone come to me and say, Zubin, I'm totally not committed. Everyone who comes to me is like, I'm committed, dude. This is it. This is happening. This is happening. I'm so good. I'm so strong about this. I'm such a hard worker. When I say something, it'll happen.
Yeah.
No one's ever come to me and said, I do it when it's convenient. I do it during business hours. I do it when I feel like it. Otherwise, I don't give a shit. No one ever says that, right? So words
Yeah.
mean nothing. Where is the evidence that you backed yourself? Where is
Yeah.
the evidence? And as a hiring manager, I don't care what computer science school you went to or what law school you went to. If you took more risk and sacrificed more and showed more grit, what it does tell me is that you want this more than the other person.
Totally. That's been the deciding factor a lot of times. I'll be honest, like, I've been in, like, where you're talking to people like, "This person's really good, this person's really good," and sometimes it does come down to that because, like, I think I've seen this on walls at, like, the startup I was at or, like, in our own coding, like, handbook at my current company. Like, grit is a thing that we want from people.
Grit.
We really want people to have grit.
And the willingness
Um
to be wrong and to lose.
Mhm.
Got to be willing to lose. Once, lose twice, because that's the only way you're going to win. And more importantly, that belief, the more you lose and the more you keep persisting, the less you need faith. Weirdly, a lot of people think
Yeah.
you need more faith. That's not actually true. The more you realize you survive and you pick yourself up and you can keep going forward, the less faith or leap of faith is required because you know what you can. It's who you become in this process, not how much money you save. Like, what's the point of saving 15 grand for the privilege of never succeeding? Well, why? Great. You've held on
Yeah.
to 15 or 20 grand or 10 grand or whatever it is that people, whatever. Great. And now you've reduced your chances so much that you could potentially be over the next 20 years, you could have lost $2 million.
Yeah. That's crazy to think sometimes these little investments balloon to, like, what they because I think in my own career, I'm like, "Wow, that small investment, like, really paid off." Just like, I try to quantify it, and maybe 100 times over at this point, something like and more in the future. I have no clue what the future holds. I'm only 40 at the end of the day. I think people are like, "Oh,
Yeah.
40." I'm like, I got a lot more to go.
100%. And this is the thing, like, we know the downside. The downside is capped at the total cost of your investment. When I signed up with a coach last year for myself, okay, it was 20 grand. And I was like, okay, the worst case scenario is I get one idea out of this. Let's say I value that idea at a one-time thing. Let's say that idea is worth 2 grand. I've lost 18 grand.
Yeah.
Okay. That's my worst case scenario. It's capped. It cannot get worse than that. And I've lost some time, but I've gained an idea out of it. It's fine.
Mhm.
If it works and I can convert that 20 grand into another 100 grand per annum, I'm 43 in a couple of months. By the time I'm 65, that's $2 million extra.
So I love the way you think about that because I don't usually think about it that, like, where formally or methodically, but that's a really good way to think because I have like just seen my investments in myself pay off in general, but I like the way you actually like break that down.
But
Um,
again, this is something I learned from the business world. So think about how
mhm.
business investments are made. So you hired someone with the marketing, right? And yes, it felt like a cash outlay, but your worst case scenario is you lose all the money.
Right? Yeah.
Best case scenario is your ROI is gas.
Yeah.
Okay. In business terms, everyone realizes that there's risk. And as long as the ROI is significantly more than the risk, it's worth a shot. But there's risk. Why don't we apply that standard to our personal life? We would do it for a
Absolutely.
business.
Yeah.
Are you an asset or not? Like, have you ever, to
Yeah.
me, not my car, not the business, not my job, I am the most reliable asset I have.
Totally.
And if I'm not going to invest in
Man.
myself, no one wants this.
Man, I this has been an amazing conversation. This took some twists and turns that I did not fully see. I feel like I've learned a lot just talk with you.
I
This has been
warned you.
really amazing.
I did warn you when we were chatting. I said, man, we're going to riff a bit. I warned you about that.
I hope you all enjoyed this as much as I have. Before we take off, any last words for our audience? If you have any, we've covered a lot of ground, a lot of places. But any last words for people out there?
Yeah, look, I think between people's self-doubt and what the world says, the problem with the world is free information. I genuinely believe this. It's going to completely screw up people's compasses. Completely. There's just too much noise. You cannot listen to a symphony in a room where everyone's tuning their instruments. It's going to sound like hell. Okay. So you have to find You need one person. You do not need 6 more mentors. You do not need another 20 influencers. You don't need another 10 books. You need one person that is good enough, that you have enough rapport with, or who's done what you want to do and who's willing to be available for you. Go all in that one person, because they'll show you how to go all in yourself. And most importantly, it will tune out everything else, because what you need is not more information. What you need is more action.
That was
You,
really good. I like that a lot. Excellent. Now, you're on the internet. I know you do speak out. You're one of the people I feel like you absolutely should be following, especially if you're in the beginning of your journey. Where can people find you on the internet?
yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best place. So, I'll put a link in the description in the show notes below. So, slash Zubin Pratap, and LinkedIn. I'm on X slash Twitter as well. My website is mashfitmastery.com. I don't put a lot there because I'm not into the, oh, look at all the things, and all that. I put what's there for people to know how to reach me. Because one of the things I look for in people is initiative, because there are going to be so many doors slammed in your face. I don't want to lure people inside. I have a minimalistic site, and if they want to reach out, they'll find a way, and there are plenty of ways on the site. Um, yeah, LinkedIn, and that's probably the best way to do it, man. Or via Brian. Reach out to Brian and say, hey, can I get in touch with that crazy Zubin guy? And he'll tell you how to do it.
I'll be your filter. Absolutely. Hey, man, thank you so much for joining. Excellent to have you on. Really appreciated this conversation. And yeah, all his information and links will be in the show notes as well if you want to follow him and connect with him.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for having me on the show. And for the people who are still listening to this point, um, I really hope you guys spend some time looking into Brian's history. Okay. And here's why. It's one thing to say, okay, you move from lawyer to software engineer, but I will never forget the fact that I came from a place of hope and privilege compared to where Brian was. Okay. You guys need to listen to his story, because what's truly impressive is making something out of almost nothing when that, that badly set back. I was never that badly set back. So, we can talk about it. It sounds fancy saying lawyer, software engineer. Don't get fooled by the glitz of any of that rubbish. Learn not to get fooled by the glitz. Grit comes in dark places, not in the spotlit places. Okay. Brian's story is a story of darkness to light. I was moving from relative light to relative light. Brian's a story of darkness to light that is infinitely more inspiring and infinitely more valuable. So take a look at Brian's story. That is what I'd say to most listeners.
Appreciate that so much, man. Thank you. That'll do it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. To learn more about becoming a software engineer with us, then check out parsity.io. If you're not quite ready for that, then jump into our dev30.xyz program, which is 30 days of working on your mindset, habits, and JavaScript skills. Totally worth it. See you next week.